Hi folks, I'm Mike. This is another Mike Chat. As you may have noticed, it's been a while since I posted a longer video. This is in part because work started again and I have less time, but also because I spent quite a bit of time researching Elon Musk and actually trying to make up my mind on how to present a perspective that people could still see him as behaving altruistically, trying to solve problems. I'd finally finished that episode this weekend, except for a few minor edits, but I'm afraid now that this is a completely wasted effort. Musk's gestures yesterday, in my opinion, show that he no longer deserves any positive considerations. There's no meaningful pacifistic agenda, and Ukraine should really do its best to avoid becoming more dependent on any of his companies. He's a corporate fascist, agitating on behalf of corporate fascism worldwide, and trying to align governments with his private business's agenda. And he knew exactly what he was doing. He deserves no apologies and no leniency in how he's interpreted anymore. Unfortunately, a lot of world leaders are now in a position where they have to figure out how to deal with this, which is going to require a lot of diplomacy. But I don't, so I'm not going to mince words anymore. And with that, I'm sharing the video anyway, in the hope that it will help us understand a little bit how we got here, and how some voters may have been trying to see Trump and Musk in a more positive light. I still genuinely don't believe that half of Americans of all races consciously voted for hatred and fascism. I'm sure that, in retrospect, I will find my own video here painful to watch. And despite the fact that I spent a lot of time discussing why I thought Musk was wrong, I still gave him too much of a pass and could have focused more on his dishonesty, his self-dealing, his opportunism, and his racism. I also think that my opening statement of the episode is wrong. I said I wouldn't talk about him again. But I really want to make at least one more episode now, driving home the point that this is a horrible human being. Selfish, dishonest, racist, and megalomaniacal, with very little empathy and virtually no redeeming characteristics. I hope you find it interesting anyway, and forgive me for spending time on this particular perspective in the first place. Please see for yourself. Today, I'm going to talk about Elon Musk for the last time, I hope. But first, I want to give a couple of quick updates and corrections. On the charity side, this channel is now about 2/3 of the way to being monetizable in terms of the number of hours that people have spent watching. So I'll keep you posted if we get closer. I actually think that's very good progress, and I'm seeing that we still have a few hundred people usually watching new videos. Every once in a while, I hope I might do better than that, but honestly, it's still more than I originally thought I was gonna get. So I'm not unhappy with this. Next, I'm gonna do two quick corrections. One correction is that in a previous video, I mentioned that I consider Trump to have attempted to overthrow the US government on January 6th in 2021. Now, it is opinion, yeah? So I can see that there could be an opinion out there in which Trump did not attempt to overthrow the government. But personally, what I saw is I saw the entire speech. I watched it all live back when it happened. And I saw someone who was desperate to remain in power, who had failed to convince his military to stage an actual outright military coup, attempting to convince a large mob of protesters to invade, to storm the Capitol building and potentially harm other members of government and attempt to dictate the outcome of the election by force. I believe that if this had succeeded in the form of violence, that is in effect overthrowing the US government. But I think that you can argue that Trump would have seen no chance of a mob of protesters on one day actually overcoming police forces that would be around the Capitol, actually dealing with the consequences of the fallout if the military were to have to be called in, actually being able to harm Congress people given that they had places to escape to and be safe. So it's definitely possible to argue that he was not intending to overthrow the government, that he was playing to his lunatic fringe base. But I honestly think it's disputable. And I don't think that the term is fundamentally wrong, because there's also clear evidence and statements, including from his top generals, that he basically asked them if they would help intervene militarily in overturning the election and had to be told that the military does swear an oath to the president, but it swears an oath also to uphold the United States Constitution, and it supersedes an order from the president that would effectively violate or terminate the US Constitution. And the general had to decline to follow that order. Interpret that as you may. One more update. YouTuber glasses. Huh? What do you think? Okay, so I'm going to try really hard to make this the last part of a sort of three-parter around Elon Musk and the AFD. Unfortunately, Musk keeps adding fuel to the fire here, and it's very difficult not to continue talking about it once you've started down this track, given what's going on with English politics now. But the only thing I will say about his further involvement in politics, and I'm going to keep it on the interview with Vital, is that if I meet somebody and within the first 5 minutes of the conversation, she tells me that I am the first person that she has spoken to in years who doesn't treat her like she's crazy, I'm going to start thinking of excuses to leave the conversation, and I would say that that would serve me rather well.
If I may continue a little bit, because now it's Elon, it's a complete new situation for me. That I just can have a normal conversation.
So let's get to Musk. Now, this has been the hardest episode for me to make thus far, which is why it's taken the longest. I've been working on what to say here that could be meaningful for 3 weeks, and I hope I don't disappoint. I know that having said that, I will definitely disappoint some of my viewers, because they'll be like, yeah, okay, that was obvious, so but I want to put a little bit of perspective that I think might be helpful to understand Musk. He has accomplished a lot. I mean, Musk has built very successful businesses, multiple of them. PayPal, very successful. Tesla, very successful. And there's no doubt that his effort really counted for a lot. Revolutionized the auto industry and built an electric car industry that automakers had claimed was basically impossible. He effectively recognized that the business model by which car makers were trying to make electric cars was deeply flawed, and that they were probably malicious about it, because when car makers like General Motors were attempting to create an electric car industry, they always started by trying to create an electric car for the masses. And this is bogus. Whenever you create a new technology, you either start with government funding, where you have infinite money, or you start with luxury so that you can hide the costs of research and development in a high unit price while you still can't actually scale the new technology to a point where you can deliver millions of items, right? So this very simple realization was really what Musk and Tesla did to pull the automotive industry's pants down. But I don't know how much of the credit for this actually goes to Musk, because he didn't start the company. The company was founded by two other people, and they were working on building the Tesla Roadster as a powerful sports car to effectively, again, pay for that R&D in a high unit cost in a meaningful way, and really set an image and make a statement about what an electric car could be. They were doing that before Musk joined as an investor. SpaceX, genuinely in some cases better missiles, although recent examples aren't working so well. But at least a scalable way to get components into space, into orbit, right? This has been fine, and SpaceX has been making good advances on this. So if you have somebody who's founded 3 businesses that are revolutionary in their own way, what kind of goal do you set next, right? So I can totally respect Elon Musk in that sense, trying to get humanity to other planets, maybe trying to get humanity out of the solar system eventually, or at least setting humanity on a path to do that. And of course, preventing humanity from self-destructing before any of these things can be reached, right? And it's not too unreasonable for someone who's had the level of success that Musk has had to become convinced that he should be the one, or that he may be one of the best candidates in the world to help decide this. Let's look at the altruistic perspective of someone who has set it as their goal to try to save humanity. And let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Well, what does that imply, right? Obviously, you now have to worry about the dangers to humanity. Those are disease, potentially nanotechnology, the gray goose scenario. There is AI, the Terminator style scenario. And of course, there's nuclear war, right? And climate change. He has definitely had a real record in doing what he can to combat climate change, although it's being diluted by recent efforts to somehow, get cozy with the political right in the United States. There's some evidence that he's trying to guide that political right to be more environmentally conscious, or at least to take global warming seriously. I still see this in recent interviews. And along that logic, if you see him as altruistic, he probably would do, as an engineer, some very simple math and say, the odds of nuclear war being greater than 0 is worse than the odds of nuclear war being 0. So if I have to sacrifice one country, if I get to make this decision, right, because I am the savior of the world, if I have to sacrifice one country to bring the odds of nuclear war to 0, I will, right? That's the engineering calculus. It's as simple as that. And that may very well be one of the main things driving him. If you look at it that way, then supporting pro-Russia parties that would stop funding Ukraine, that would reestablish trade with Russia and China, is a simple, logical step. Now, what's wrong with this? Well, I think one thing that's wrong with this is that I don't think Musk has actually necessarily taken the time to understand where international affairs were actually headed. I think he may be overestimating the possibility that Russia would actually behave rationally, even if it were somehow simply given Ukraine, even if it were somehow just handed Ukraine by the West, just sold out, right? Which of course would be a horrible, horrible thing to do. Do we actually have any evidence that Russia would then behave rationally and that it would not make it worse, right? I don't think he knows enough. I've gone through the written documents that were published by the Kremlin, and I spent a long time listening, as those of you who've followed the other videos know, to someone named Mark Galeotti, who is really quite a well-studied Kremlin and Russia expert. And what struck me about Mark Galeotti also, right, and I've mentioned this before, every single time as I was going through his podcasts after the fact, every single time he predicted that Russia would behave rationally, he turned out to be wrong. So in simple terms, you actually can't rule out that Putin is hell-bent on having World War III happen, if he can make it happen no matter what. You can't rule this out, because every other attempt to interpret something he had been doing as rational has turned out to be wrong. Every attempt or every guess that he would de-escalate at some point in time has turned out to be wrong. Now, the next few months, the first few months of the Trump administration may prove me wrong. It could be that now somehow we really will have a Putin looking to talk, looking to negotiate, looking to find some kind of reasonable ceasefire solution with a secure Ukraine. But keep in mind that what is on the table right now is actually literally worse than what would have happened from Russia's perspective if Ukraine had joined NATO, right? If Ukraine had joined NATO, nothing would have changed. It would still be there. There would be no additional troops there, because that's not what joining NATO does. Ukrainian troops would now happen to be NATO troops. But that's it, right? It doesn't do anything unless you attack it, unless you poke it. But if we go into any of the ceasefire plans that Europe and Ukraine would now agree to, then we're looking at a scenario where if there is a ceasefire and if there is a peace, there will definitely be European troops, up to 100,000 of them, permanently stationed in Ukraine. The exact scenario that he used as a justification for the war, right? NATO moving troops and weapons right up to Russia's border. That's exactly what would then happen, right? So Musk really needs to look at it much more closely before he makes any decision that in endorsing or somehow pushing for pro-Russia parties in Europe would help some kind of altruistic goal. But there's a really serious flaw with Elon Musk. And actually, my friend Victor, who I've chatted with and who I even had a conversation with about Musk that I may publish later, pointed out is he does have very much the mind of an engineer. And engineering minds and mathematics-oriented minds just love correct answers, okay? Even if the problem was complicated, even if you spend months or years trying to work on something that is complicated mechanical interactions or mathematical formulas and statistical modeling, in the end, this kind of mind doesn't do that well in a sort of a system where there is no right answer. You can make your own logical guess and say, okay, I look at it mathematically, chance of nuclear war is worse than no chance of nuclear war. Can we mitigate the chance of nuclear war? But there are other factors in this equation, and this is where the idea that you don't want to reason about complicated outcomes becomes very relevant, right? Because even a nuclear war, it may not destroy humanity. A nuclear war that has a partial destruction of humanity or a large death toll can still, in some circumstances, be a better moral outcome depending on the world you have after the nuclear war, right? So if you go, the other extreme, right? If let's say Adolf Hitler had nukes, right? Or let's say that Russia we would just get out of the way of Russia because it has nukes, and Russia decides it just doesn't want to stop. It doesn't want to stop with Ukraine. It doesn't want to stop with the Soviet Union. It doesn't want to stop with Europe, and you just keep getting out of the way. Well, the Russian regime has not been able to create a particularly strong standard of living for its people. It's not terrible, but on its own, left to its own devices, it is a kleptocracy. And only a very, very small amount of wealth that is entering Russia from other countries reaches the average Russian and actually improves the average Russian's quality of life. So you would be looking at a scenario where a system that is, once again, not nearly as good at actually creating a decent quality of life for most people in society is the one that most people live under, right? That's not a good outcome. And you can definitely argue that there is a certain amount of toll that you pay to have a better outcome for humanity. That's in fact the entire premise of the American mindset that freedom is worth fighting for. In the worst case, freedom is worth dying for. I think that ultimately I have to assume somewhere in this guy's mind that he understands that the way he behaves, like if he were actually in Russia with his temperament and his financial success, he probably wouldn't be alive. Because someone with that level of financial success starts to constitute a threat. There's been plenty of billionaires in Russia, especially in recent years, exiled or put in prison or having attempts made on their lives. Most likely, of course, under Putin's orders. So someone like Musk would not do well in China or in Russia or in anywhere like that kind of regime. So I can't consider it ethical for Elon Musk to think that he can make that choice for Ukrainians to somehow save the world, right? I don't think that he can do that. And that actually takes me to challenging another part of Elon Musk's larger goal, because I've heard him say now multiple times, the thing he marvels most about is intelligence, right? He has this obsession with preserving intelligence. And frankly, I don't relate to it. I've also worked in technology for most of my life, and I respect intelligence at being able to help solve problems. But what I see worth preserving is like the ability to experience joy, to experience sorrow, pain, pleasure, right? Those are the things that make life special. Those are the things, those are the only meanings there really are to me. And I think that ultimately, I just would simply say that the best we can really hope to do in general is to ensure that while there are beings that are capable of experiencing both pleasure or pain, right, in various ways, in its various forms, emotional or physical, our purpose is to try to maximize the pleasure. right? To try to maximize the positive and to try to minimize and preserve any life that we can from the negative, to not cause suffering. I think that's it. Intelligence is much more disputable to me, because in order for intelligence to really ultimately be considered the thing worth saving, we have to still show that it is actually sustainable, and we can't be sure of this. And one more point that comes to mind about this nuclear war and saving humanity is, if I'm like Musk, if I set myself only the biggest goal, if I say my goal is saving humanity no matter what, taking it to the stars, but along the way I throw an entire country under the bus, I risk reigniting a level of racist radicalism in Germany that hasn't been seen since the 1940s. And I basically am willing to throw almost all of my values and almost all Western values out the window in the pursuit of this one larger goal. Suppose the larger goal fails. Yeah? What have you actually accomplished if the larger goal fails? Nothing, right? Someone who has only the absolute highest, biggest goal as their ideal is ultimately going to behave in the exact same way as a total psychopath who has nothing in mind except to cause as much ruin as possible, unless they actually meet that goal in the end. And frankly, quite frankly, the goals that Elon Musk has set, if they are to be achieved by humanity, they'll be achieved. Overall, as humanity, we've been building civilizations and advancing technology for about 4,000 or 5,000 years, maybe 6,000 years, right? And we are going at an accelerating pace. So there's also a question of, well, why should it be you if you're Musk? And then finally, I think there's a lot of evidence that he's honestly just kind of a shitty human being. Like, for example, he said that he blames wokeism for distancing him from his son. He's running 5 companies. He's tweeting like all day and all night. I can't possibly imagine that he's actually spending any significant amount of time with his son. I don't even know how many sons he has. He has 12 children. And he thinks that wokeism is the reason his children don't feel close to him and that he has no relationship to his children. Like, what the fuck is he on? Yeah, that's a terrible parent. He used one of his sons to make Tucker Carlson look likable. I'll show you the clip here. You see that his son walks into the Tucker Carlson video so that Tucker can act like a extremely likable human being who loves children, right? And they make it look, somehow he acts as though this was an accident. Like, Musk doesn't even wear a freaking suit. You think that, like, Musk's kid walks around in a suit and tie just for fun? And then, of course, the way he's behaving on Twitter, right? In a large set of tweets, Keir Starmer has actually prosecuted and broke up the actual ring of pedophiles that is the primary scandal to which Elon Musk's tweets are referring back to. So he has literally done the opposite of what Musk is accusing him of. And frankly, I consider that evil, all right? I'm painting someone who has actually successfully battled pedophilia and child sex rings in England, and as enabling the exact thing that they made a large part of their career out of destroying is despicable. There's no other word for it. He also clearly lied in interviews I saw about how he treats factory workers. He basically said he loves them. He fires people on the spot. He hates unions. He lied about what unions are. He doesn't want unions because they create an adversarial relationship between company leadership and its workers. You have to understand the history behind these things. Unions formed after there were incidents of company leadership literally employing chain guns to mow down people from their workforces who were protesting to try to get better pay and better living conditions. And it's not a movement that the world can simply afford to give up on. I'm sorry. Labor rights movements have to continue to exist. Another thing I found interesting, reviewing hours and hours of different interview footage with Elon Musk, is that he at one point painted people who want to speak about him negatively on the internet as only trying to get clicks. Okay, you know what? In the interest of trying to make this channel here charitable for Ukraine, I'm trying to get clicks. Yeah, but what he doesn't acknowledge is that all the people that are willing to let him sit there in an interview for 3 hours saying whatever he wants and never challenging him on any of the stuff he has to say are doing the exact same thing, right? So that's always striking when you see that level of hypocrisy. Overall, I hope that this has been an interesting perspective for you. Like I said, this video was difficult. I spent a long time looking through different material, trying to make up my mind, and ultimately had to present multiple perspectives, which I hope you can draw on as well to ultimately make up your own mind. Finally, as promised, I would like to call out one of my favorite Ukrainian channels, and I will this time call out Maria Drutska. She is a Ukrainian YouTuber and internet personality. Her YouTube channel doesn't get nearly enough views in my opinion either. So she's by far not the most visible YouTuber in pro-Ukraine circles, but actually her Twitter channel is pretty broadly followed, and I have to say, I think her social media channels, Twitter, Blue Sky, are definitely worth following. Her videos occasionally, definitely check them out. And what I mostly respect here is that this is somebody who has been in Ukraine. So while other major YouTubers like Dennis actually left Ukraine and changed from, reporting from Ukraine to reporting on Ukraine, and even though I respect him as well, I respect Dennis quite a bit. I think that overall he's done a lot of good, but and he also raises money. But what I respect about Maria and a few others is that they're actually there, and at times when there really are when there are strikes or when things get really ugly, they're actually also reporting and literally tweeting what's happening in their neighborhoods. So huge respect to that, and I think any support for their channels is actually part of their source of income that will really help them out. So go check her out. And with that, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.